Buddy, a loyal German shepherd, spent 10 years serving with honor as a military working dog. Trained to protect, rescue, and stand by his team, Buddy's service was nothing short of heroic. But when his time in the military ended, his life took a heartbreaking turn. Retired and forgotten, Buddy found himself chained in a cold backyard, a shadow of the hero he once was. What happened next is a story of courage, redemption, and the extraordinary bond between a dog and those who believe in second chances. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This story will touch your heart and remind you of the power of kindness and loyalty. Buddy was a hero. For 10 long years, he had served alongside soldiers in some of the most dangerous places in the world. His nose had sniffed out explosives, his instincts had saved lives, and his steady presence had provided comfort during the darkest hours. But time waits for no one, not even for heroes. As Buddy's muzzle began to gray and his legs lost a bit of their agility, the decision was made to retire him from military service. It wasn't an easy decision for Sergeant Jake Carter, Buddy's handler. The two had been through everything together, missions that stretched for days, nights under the stars, and countless brushes with danger. Jake had planned to take Buddy home with him, to give his loyal partner the retirement he deserved. But life after the military wasn't kind to Jake. Financial struggles and health issues left him unable to care for Buddy, and with a heavy heart, he placed Buddy in a rehoming program designed for retired working dogs. Buddy's future should have been bright. The program promised to find him a loving home where he could live out his golden years in peace. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. Instead of finding a family who would treasure him, Buddy ended up with a household that saw him as nothing more than a tool. He was chained in a barren backyard, his only purpose to bark at intruders. The transition was jarring. One day, he was a celebrated hero, receiving pats on the head and words of gratitude from soldiers. The next, he was forgotten, a shadow of his former self tied to a rusty chain. Days turned into weeks, then months, and Buddy's world grew smaller and smaller. His once shiny coat became dull and matted. His strong muscles faded as the chain restricted his movement. The food he was given was sparse and barely enough to keep him alive, let alone healthy. The water bowl was often empty, and in the winter it froze solid. The cold was unbearable. On frigid nights, Buddy would curl into the smallest ball he could, his breath visible in the air as he tried to preserve what little warmth his body could generate. The harsh conditions wore on him, but what hurt the most was the loneliness. Buddy had been surrounded by people his whole life. The absence of companionship was a void that no amount of barking at passing cars could fill. Yet, through it all, Buddy held on to a flicker of hope. Somewhere deep inside, he remembered what it was like to be valued, to be loved. He remembered the camaraderie of his soldier companions, the bond he had shared with Jake. It was that memory, that tiny spark of what once was, that kept him going. One bitter winter morning, as the wind howled through the yard, Buddy lay curled in his usual spot near the fence. His fur was frosted with ice, and his body trembled from the cold. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to escape, if only for a moment, into the memories of better times. He didn't notice the sound of footsteps approaching until a shadow fell over him. Lifting his head weakly, Buddy saw a figure standing by the gate. It was a woman, bundled in a thick coat, her face framed by a scarf. She knelt by the gate, her eyes wide with shock and sadness, as she took in the sight of him. "Oh my God," she whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. "What have they done to you?" Buddy stared at her, too weak to bark, too tired to care. But something about her voice, the softness in her tone, stirred something inside him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a treat, holding it out to him through the fence. "It's okay, boy," she said. "I'm here to help." For the first time in what felt like forever, Buddy wagged his tail, just once, but it was enough. The woman at the gate was named Emily, a volunteer with a local rescue organization. She had been alerted to Buddy's situation by a concerned neighbor, who couldn't bear to see the dog's deteriorating condition any longer. As she crouched by the gate, her heart ached at the sight of him. His once powerful frame was now gaunt, his ribs sharply visible beneath his matted coat. The chain around his neck had worn his fur down to raw patches of skin, and his eyes, though dulled by suffering, still held a flicker of hope. Emily didn't waste time. She knocked on the front door of the house, her breath visible in the freezing air. When the homeowner opened the door, she launched into her prepared speech, keeping her voice firm but polite. "I'm here about your dog," she said. "It's clear he's not being cared for properly. I'd like to take him off your hands and make sure he gets the care he needs." The homeowner's reaction was defensive at first. "He's just a dog," they muttered, shrugging. "He barks, and that's all he's supposed to do. He's fine." Emily clenched her fists at her sides, suppressing the anger bubbling inside her. "He's not fine," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "He's malnourished, freezing, and neglected. If you don't want him, let me take him. He deserves better than this." After a tense silence, the homeowner finally relented. "Fine," they said with a dismissive wave of their hand. "Take him. He's more trouble than he's worth anyway." Emily wasted no time. She unlatched the gate and approached Buddy cautiously, speaking softly to him as she went. "It's okay, boy. You're coming with me now. No more chains. No more cold." She knelt beside him, her fingers working quickly to remove the chain around his neck. As it fell away, Buddy's body seemed to relax slightly, as if the weight of the chain had been more than just physical. She wrapped him in a thick blanket she had brought with her, lifting him gently into her arms despite his size. He was lighter than he should have been, his body weak from months of neglect. As she carried him to her car, Buddy rested his head against her shoulder, his eyes closing in exhaustion, but also relief. The drive to the rescue shelter was quiet. Buddy lay in the back seat, wrapped in the blanket, his breathing slow and steady. Emily glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her heart breaking at the sight of his frailty. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I promise." At the shelter, Emily and the staff worked quickly to assess Buddy's condition. A veterinarian named Dr. Harris conducted a thorough examination, her face grim as she noted his malnutrition, the raw patches on his neck, and the signs of muscle atrophy. "He's in rough shape," she said, "but with proper care, he can recover." Emily stayed by Buddy's side as he was bathed, the dirt and grime of his former life washed away. His coat, though matted and thin, showed hints of the proud, sleek fur he once had. He was given a warm meal, the first real food he'd had in what must have been months. As he ate, his tail wagged faintly, a sign that his spirit, though battered, was not broken. Over the next few days, Buddy began to show signs of improvement. His eyes grew brighter, his movements less sluggish. He started to trust Emily, leaning into her touch when she stroked his head and wagging his tail when she entered the room. The staff at the shelter were amazed at his resilience. "He's a fighter," Dr. Harris said. "Most dogs in his condition would have given up, but not Buddy." Emily knew there was still a long road ahead, but she was determined to see Buddy through it. She had promised him a better life, and she intended to keep that promise. Buddy's progress was slow, but steady. The shelter staff gave him the best care they could, but it was Emily who spent the most time with him. She would arrive every morning before the shelter officially opened, bringing warm food and sitting with him as he ate. Over time, Buddy began to recognize her footsteps, his tail wagging slightly whenever she entered the room. One afternoon, as Emily gently brushed his coat, Buddy leaned into her touch, letting out a low sigh of contentment. It was the first time he had shown such trust, and it brought tears to Emily's eyes. "You're such a good boy," she whispered. "You've been through so much, but you're still holding on." The shelter staff noticed the bond forming between them. "You know," Dr. Harris said one day, "Buddy's going to need a forever home soon. I can't think of anyone better suited to give him that than you." Emily hesitated. Her small apartment wasn't exactly ideal for a large dog like Buddy, but she couldn't bear the thought of him going to anyone else. "Let's see how he does over the next few weeks," she said, though her heart already knew the answer. As Buddy grew stronger, his personality began to shine through. He was playful, curious, and deeply affectionate. He would nudge Emily's hand with his nose, demanding more pets, or rest his head on her lap when he was tired. The shelter staff often joked that he had gone from a forgotten soldier to a spoiled prince. But there were still challenges. Buddy's past had left scars, both physical and emotional. He would freeze at sudden loud noises, his body tensing as if preparing for danger. He was wary of strangers, his trust hard won, but easily shaken. Emily worked patiently with him, using her calm voice and gentle touch to reassure him whenever his fears surfaced. One day, while walking Buddy in the shelter's yard, Emily noticed a change in him. His steps were lighter, his tail held higher. He sniffed at the grass, barked at a bird, and even chased a falling leaf. For the first time, Buddy seemed truly happy. "That's it, boy," Emily said, laughing as he bounded toward her, his tongue lolling out in a joyful grin. "That's who you are. You're not just surviving anymore. You're living." That evening, Emily made her decision. As she filled out the adoption paperwork, the shelter staff gathered around, cheering and clapping. "You're officially his now," Dr. Harris said, handing Emily the completed forms. "He's going to thrive with you. I just know it." Emily knelt beside Buddy, who sat patiently by her side. "Looks like you're stuck with me, Buddy," she said, scratching behind his ears. His tail thumped against the floor in response. His amber eyes filled with a trust that had made Emily's heart swell. The drive home was quiet, but there was a sense of peace in the air. Buddy sat in the back seat, looking out the window as the city lights passed by. When they arrived at Emily's apartment, he followed her up the stairs, his tail wagging at every new sight and smell. Inside, Emily had prepared a cozy corner for him, complete with a soft bed and a basket of toys. Buddy sniffed the bed, circled it a few times, and then flopped down with a satisfied grunt. Emily sat beside him, stroking his fur as he rested his head on her lap. "You're home now," she said softly. "No more chains, no more cold. Just love." Buddy let out a contented sigh, his body relaxing completely for the first time in years. Emily smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of their journey together. Buddy's new life was a world away from the one he had known. Emily made sure of that. Every morning began with a hearty breakfast, followed by long walks in the nearby park. At first, Buddy was hesitant, his steps cautious as he explored his new surroundings. But with each passing day, his confidence grew. His once sluggish gait became lively, and his ears perked up at every new sound. Emily noticed the change in his demeanor. Buddy no longer flinched at every loud noise, though sudden bangs still made him pause. She worked patiently to help him overcome these fears, speaking softly and offering treats whenever he faced a trigger. It was a slow process, but one filled with moments of triumph. One such moment came during a visit to the park. A group of children were playing nearby, their laughter echoing through the air. Buddy froze at first, his body tense as he watched them. Emily knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. "It's okay, Buddy," she said softly. "They're just kids." Buddy's ears flicked toward her voice, and after a long pause, he took a tentative step forward. One of the children, a little girl with pigtails, noticed him and asked, "Can I pet him?" Emily smiled. "Only if he's okay with it. Let's go slow." The girl approached carefully, holding out her hand for Buddy to sniff. He leaned forward, his nose twitching, and after a moment, his tail wagged. The girl giggled and stroked his fur, her small hand gentle against his back. Buddy's eyes softened, and Emily felt a swell of pride. He was learning to trust again. That night, as Buddy lay on his bed, Emily sat beside him, scrolling through old photos on her phone. She stopped at a picture of Buddy during his military days, standing proudly beside his handler, Jake. "You've been through so much," she murmured, stroking his fur. "But look at you now. You're so strong, Buddy." She couldn't shake the thought of Jake and how much Buddy must have meant to him. On a whim, she decided to look him up. After some searching, she found a contact and sent a cautious message explaining who she was and how she had adopted Buddy. She didn't expect a response, but the next morning, her phone buzzed with a reply. Jake's message was brief but filled with emotion. "I've been looking for him for years. Thank you for saving him. Can I see him?" Emily's heart raced as she read the words. She knew how much Buddy's past handler must have missed him, but she also felt a protective instinct for Buddy's new life. She decided to arrange a meeting, trusting that it would be good for both of them. When the day arrived, Jake stood at the park, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. His face was lined with years of hardship, but his eyes lit up when he saw Buddy approaching. "Buddy!" he called, his voice breaking. Buddy froze for a moment, his ears flicking at the familiar voice. Then, as if a flood of memories washed over him, he bolted forward, his tail wagging furiously. Jake knelt, opening his arms as Buddy leapt into them, letting out a series of joyful barks. "I missed you, boy," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "I missed you so much." Emily watched from a distance, her eyes filling with tears. She saw the bond between them, unbroken despite the years apart. When Jake finally approached her, Buddy at his side, he extended a hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "You gave him what I couldn't." Emily smiled. "He's an incredible dog. He deserves the world." That evening, Buddy rested his head on Emily's lap, his body relaxed and his eyes full of contentment. For the first time in years, he had not just a home, but a family who truly saw him for the hero he was. The reunion with Jake seemed to unlock a new side of Buddy. Over the days that followed, he carried himself with a sense of pride, his head held higher and his tail wagging more often. Emily noticed how his demeanor shifted when Jake was around, as if a part of his old self had been rediscovered. Jake began visiting regularly, each time bringing treats or toys for Buddy. The two would sit in the park for hours, with Jake reminiscing about their time in the military. "You saved me more times than I can count, boy," Jake would say, his voice thick with emotion. Buddy would lean into him, his tail thumping against the ground as if to say, "I remember." Emily, watching from a bench nearby, was amazed at how deeply the bond between them remained intact. She could see the love and respect Jake had for Buddy, and it warmed her heart. Yet, a question lingered in her mind. Would Jake want Buddy back permanently? The thought both worried and comforted her. She knew how much Jake cared for Buddy, but she also felt protective of the life they had built together. One afternoon, as Emily and Jake sat on the grass watching Buddy play, Jake broke the silence. "Emily," he began, his voice hesitant, "I can't thank you enough for what you've done for him. Seeing him happy like this, it means the world to me." Emily smiled. "He's an incredible dog. I'm just lucky to have him in my life." Jake nodded, his gaze fixed on Buddy. "I thought about asking to take him back," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I see how much he loves you. He's found a home with you, and I would never take that away from him." Relief washed over Emily, and tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you, Jake," she said softly. "That means so much to me. But you'll always be a part of his life." From that day forward, Jake became an honorary member of their little family. He and Emily worked together to ensure Buddy's happiness, splitting their time between long walks, play sessions, and quiet evenings at home. Buddy thrived under their shared care, his confidence and energy returning in full force. One crisp autumn morning, Emily decided to take Buddy to a special event organized by the local community, a tribute to service dogs. She had heard about it through the shelter and thought it would be the perfect way to honor Buddy's past while celebrating his new life. When they arrived, Buddy seemed to sense the significance of the moment. He walked beside Emily with his head held high, his amber eyes scanning the crowd with curiosity. Jake met them there, dressed in his old uniform, a proud smile on his face. "You ready to shine, boy?" he asked, scratching Buddy behind the ears. The event was emotional, filled with stories of bravery and loyalty. When Buddy's name was called, Emily and Jake walked him to the front of the stage. The announcer spoke about Buddy's years of service, his incredible bond with Jake, and the second chance he had found with Emily. As the crowd erupted in applause, Buddy sat proudly between them, his tail wagging as if he understood the recognition. That evening, as they returned home, Buddy flopped onto his bed with a contented sigh. Emily knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "You're a hero, Buddy," she said softly. "You've always been one." Jake, sitting nearby, added, "And now, you've got the retirement you deserve." Buddy's eyes closed, his body completely relaxed as the warmth of their voices surrounded him. For the first time in years, he had it all: a past to be proud of, a present filled with love, and a future that promised nothing but happiness. Winter arrived, blanketing the town in snow. Emily's cozy home became a sanctuary for Buddy, who now spent his days lounging by the fire, his golden brown coat gleaming with health. Max and Millie, two playful dogs Emily had recently adopted from the shelter, brought new energy to the house. and Buddy quickly became their mentor and protector. One snowy morning, Emily decided to take Buddy and the others on a walk through the nearby forest trails. Jake joined them, his presence a comforting reminder of Buddy's heroic past. The air was crisp, and the snow crunched softly beneath their boots. Buddy trotted ahead, his tail wagging as he explored the fresh powder, his breath visible in the cold air. Max and Millie darted after him, their playful barks echoing through the trees. As they walked, Jake and Emily reminisced about the journey that had brought them together. "It's amazing how far he's come," Jake said, watching Buddy with pride. "To think he was chained and forgotten not so long ago." Emily nodded, her voice warm. "He's not just surviving anymore, he's thriving, and he's brought so much joy to all of us." Buddy stopped and turned, his ears perking up as he watched them. His amber eyes seemed to shine with gratitude, as if he understood every word. That evening, the house was filled with the warm glow of the fireplace. Buddy lay on his favorite blanket, Max and Millie curled up beside him. Jake sat on the couch, sipping a mug of hot chocolate, while Emily flipped through a photo album. She paused at a picture of Buddy from his military days, standing tall beside Jake in full gear. "He's been through so much," Emily said, her voice soft. "But he's still the same loyal, brave dog he's always been." Jake nodded, setting his mug down. "He's a reminder of what loyalty and resilience look like. No matter what he faced, he never gave up." Emily smiled, reaching down to stroke Buddy's fur. He tilted his head back to look at her, his eyes filled with trust and contentment. "You're home now," she said softly, "and you're loved." Buddy's story didn't end there. His tale of survival and redemption inspired many in the community. Emily and Jake began speaking at local events, sharing Buddy's journey and advocating for the adoption of retired working dogs. Buddy became a symbol of hope, his story touching the hearts of everyone who heard it. Years later, as Buddy's steps grew slower and his muzzle grayer, he remained the heart of Emily's home. Max and Millie had grown into strong, spirited dogs under his guidance, and Jake was now a permanent fixture in their lives, a part of the family Buddy had brought together. One summer evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Emily sat on the porch with Buddy resting at her feet. Jake joined her, a photo of Buddy in his military days in his hand. "He's a hero," Jake said, his voice steady. "And he always will be." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "He saved so many lives, including mine. I can't imagine life without him." Buddy let out a contented sigh, his tail wagging faintly. He had found his place, surrounded by love, and he knew he would never be forgotten. If Buddy's story touched your heart, remember that there are countless dogs like him waiting for a second chance. Consider adopting a retired working dog or volunteering at your local shelter. Together, we can give these heroes the love and life they deserve. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it with someone who loves stories of courage and redemption. Let's spread kindness and hope.